Hi, welcome to my new video. Is it time to switch to Linux? Let's talk about it. Now, maybe you have heard the news, for example, Valve directly working with the Arch Linux devs, for example. The amount of Linux users drastically increasing, especially when you look at the market share, for example. Now, if you're someone that really wants to switch away from Windows, but you have zero experience with Linux, and you're completely overwhelmed with the different distros, different possibilities, and especially by the terminal, then my recommendation would be Zorin OS. Zorin OS is a Linux distro, Ubuntu based, specifically made for former Windows users. I've made, by coincidence, a video about it. In the description you can find it. A tutorial, a showcase, whatever. Simple, sleek design, and you do not even need to use the terminal. But yeah. So if you would want to make the switch to Linux, what do you need to put into considerations? What are the things you can expect from it? Now, one really important difference between, an OS, for example, like Microsoft Windows to Linux is how do you install packages. Now, if, for example, on Windows I want to install the Wacom tablet, a drawing tablet drivers, I need to go to the different website, install a .exe file, execute it on my host system. Now, if you trust the website, good and fine, but it can happen way too quickly that you download some malevolent data. On Linux, it is not as easy to be infected by malware. How is this the case? 90% of all times, you do not install packages from, some developer. You install them from a distro. No. You install them from a repository. And depending on the system, the distro you're using, there is usually an official repository and a user-made repository. Now, for all simplifications, I'm using EndeavorsOS, which is Arch-based. And on Arch, I'm primarily working with two repositories. The official repository made by the developers and the Arch user repository. It's really famous, everyone loves it, even your grandma. And now it's a huge amount of tools, programs, etc. But let's not get lost in it. What's so special about the repos you install packages from? Everyone can look at the packages in the repositories. Everyone can see into the codes of the packages and programs, which thereby means the likelihood some malevolent party uploads their data and tries to infect users is really low because people would notice. To be really specific, Linux users would even notice a virus simply by the fact that the boot up takes 1/100th of a second longer than usual. That's called humor. And of course, you have the ability to install packages from a third-party developer directly, so you are not limited by the repositories. It's just your primary source of packages. Now, it's rich in distros. Now, of course, you have, your mainline distributions, you have Debian, you have Fedora, you have Arch, and some more. And most of them are just derivatives of these distros. But what am I trying to get into? There's a Linux distro for every use case. For example, are you trying to run a server and need the most stable packages ever? Then, for example, you can use a Debian system. If you want to be up to date with all packages, you can use an Arch-based. And of course, you might be overwhelmed with this, use Zorin OS. Just use Zorin OS. I'm not trying to confuse you, I'm just showing to you the possibilities you would have after you have made yourself comfortable in the Linux environment. Linux is open source. I know, Captain Obvious is on the loose again. Which means, for example, in regards of driver support. Back in the Windows days, I had an issue where, I was working with the Wacom drawing tablet. And for it to work, I needed to install some drivers. Which I did. I installed the drivers on Windows, so good so fine, it then worked. And there was this bug, whenever I've unplugged any device after installing the drivers for Wacom, I had a blue screen of death. On Linux, you would not have this issue, because there's an open source driver for everything. And since the developers for a certain driver, for example, can see into the source code of the Linux itself, they can make absolutely sure there would be no complications. Privacy and security. First of all, it's not Windows. It's not Windows which can forcefully install telemetry on the system. Install, AI recall, for example. And since right now Linux has a rather low market share, there are barely any malware specifically made for Linux distros. And of course, as I said previously, the market share of Linux distros is rising, of Linux users, let's be specific here. And of course, this will change in the future. And this will be a topic for the future. But what I want to say is, it's fundamentally more secure. Now, one really important factor for most of you will be gaming. Let's just be honest. And with Valve's input of Proton, for example, the improvement of gaming was immense. Proton, a derivative of Wine. I'm not going to talk about what this specifically is. Just for you to know, running Windows programs through a translation environment inside Linux works perfectly fine. 90%, 95% of the times, okay. But, let's ignore the anti-cheat problems. What I'm trying to say is anti-cheat problems of developers refusing to, work together with Steam. Now, for example, another huge topic of debate was Nvidia drivers, for example, which also have seen a drastic improvement. I'm not going to deeper into this. What am I trying to say? That support is improving drastically for Linux systems, drivers, tools, etc. Another advantage, of course, is Linux is open source, and thereby it also has a focus on open source programs. And for example, if you download a store, Discover for example, you get link directly to different apps and programs, all of them open source, and can directly install them into your system. And thereby you can find many great alternatives to, proprietary software you might be used to. Let's talk about Krita, for example, for drawing, editing, etc. Inkscape, then Kdenlive for video editing, so and so. But I will focus on these topics in another video. And of course, desktop interface. You can, for example, you download Fedora's distro. And you can, for example, make it look like macOS, make it look like Windows by desktops. I will make in the future a video specifically about different desktops and how they work, how they look, and how you can interact with them. It sounds way more dramatic than it actually is, but just to give you a showcase and an introduction to you. Thanks for watching this video. Keep working, because there's still much to do, and go read Berserk.